Hashem's Basai Tivtach Uviagit Lasacha. We're now in the second parak of Ezra. This parak is basically a listing. It is all of the names of the people, 42,000 plus people who came in Shivas Tzion after Cyrus allows the Bnei Israel to return. And what's interesting, if you just think about, just not too long ago, there were so many of our ancestors, so many of our relatives, so many people coming through on Ellis Island, and they were recorded. Now, relative to how many people were left behind, not so many people entered. Each one a name, each one perhaps not having any form of identification, or forms that were ripped, or forms that were fudged. But ultimately, all of their names were written down as they came to go on to hopefully a better life. Here, these Jewish people, they actually did a similar thing. Their names are recorded. Why are they recorded? Perhaps it's just as sad as it was with Ellis Island. There were so many people who were left behind, so many people who chose not to go back from Bavel, so many people that just accepted where they were, their position. And the Rabbanim were very upset. They said that had the Bnei Israel come like a choma mi Bavel, like a wall together with unity, then the 6th century BCE would have been done. Mashiach, we would have been, the trajectory of history would have completely changed. And so these people were Moser Nefesh. These people came from Gullus, and they were taking a risky road, but they were doing it l'shem shamayim. Now let's understand who these people were, because truthfully, it's a combination of some very interesting kinds of people. Ve'ila b'nei ha-medina ha'olim mishavei hagola asher higla Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel leBavel. So these are the people who went up. They were the captives of Nebuchadnezzar from Bavel. V'yashuvu Yerushalayim v'Yehuda ish le'iro. And what happens is they're going to return Yerushalayim and Yehuda ish le'iro. People are going to go back to their hometowns. They're going to go back to places that they haven't been for many years, a few decades. And ultimately, there are some places that are going to be considered places that they don't feel that they can go back to until the true Zman of Mashiach. You see, what happens during that time, and maybe that is a narrative that the people in Gullus are telling themselves, is that there's no real Navi telling them to go back. There's no real Nevuah, because remember, Nevuah is gone. There is no more Nevuah. And so they can't get that direct understanding from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not coming in the way that you envisioned Mashiach to be coming. Wow, that holy person that comes and says the words, that Yeshayahu, that Yirmiyahu, that Yecheskel, those people, that ship sailed. We don't have that in Gullus. And so it's not the same. They're taking a leap of faith. And when they get to Israel, to Eretz Israel, there are going to be places that are off limits because they feel like it's not the time of Mashiach yet. So there are holy spots. We don't have the same level of holiness, so we can't go to some of the same spots. But other people are going Yehuda ish le'iro. People are going back home. They're going to reconnect with their cities. Asher ba'u im Zerubbabel. And so who is it? Zerubbabel. Some say that is Daniel, Yeshua, Nehemiah, Sharia, Ra'alia, Mordechai. Yes, Mordechai. Mordechai from the story of Mordechai and Esther. Now, we have an understanding that Mordechai was a big gadol. And in the time of Esther, he was one of the biggest and the greatest. And he was actually, in this pasuk, he's relegated to lower down. There are people that are way before him. Why is that? Well, if we remember correctly, at the end of the Megillas Esther, remember, Ruv HaYehudim, he was accepted by many of the Jews, but the Sanhedrin was pretty mad at him. And they said, wait a second, we know that you understand that, that you should be learning. You're a Talmid Chacham, you're a Tzaddik, you're a Rebbe. What are you getting involved with politics so much? And it's not so good. And so they weren't so pleased that this big Talmid Chacham was also involved with politics. Or he was, while he was involved with politics, it was a pikuach nefesh. But then afterwards, he's like, no, go back to learning. That's it, my friend. And so he's relegated further down. But these are the people who went with them. And the Mispar Anshe Am Yisrael, these are the people of Am Yisrael. They are the people of Yehuda, Benjamin, and the Shevet of Levi. So it goes through all the different families. It's very interesting. In Pasuk Yud, it mentions Bnei Zakkai, Sheva Ma'os V'Shishim, and that's like Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai is a descendant. And it just goes through and it lists, and it's a very long parak. So just to highlight, in Pasuk Chav Gimel, it says, V'anshe Anosos Me'ab Esrim V'Shmona. The people of Anosos are 128. Who are the people of Anosos? Yes, those are the people, if you remember, and give yourself 2 points if you remember from our story, the story of Yirmiyahu. And what happened in that story? So very beautifully, we know that it was Yirmiyahu, the people, the Kohanim that are not far from Yerushalayim. They were some of them were really, the people of Anosos were really not nice, and they were disgusting to him, and they were the worst prosecutors. And so when all of his neighbors, they opposed him, and they tried to destroy him. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them a big punishment. And they said that they were only bad was going to come to Anosos. But here, surprisingly, 128 of them lived and survived and returned to Eretz Yisrael. And that shows, again, the power of tshuva. That right before the decree would be nullified, as long as they did tshuva, and that's what they did. And so 128 of them remained. And that means that, again, it's an understanding that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take away. He gave them a death sentence, but because of the power of tshuva and the impact of their sincerity, they were able to be saved. Other interesting ideas. So it goes through all of the Yisraelim first. And we know that they're from the Shvatim of Yehuda and from Binyamin. Now that concludes that. And then in Pasuk 35, once we concluded all of the people of Yisrael, now we're going to speak about the Kohanim. So the Kohanim, there were a lot of Kohanim. We know that the Kohanim were divided into 24 groups, and 4 of those groups come to Shivas Tzion. Not a lot, but ultimately the total of the 4 families is 4,289 Kohanim. Now, it does make sense that the Kohanim would want their yichus back. Now, on the one hand, they were very comfortable in Bavel. They were honored, they were respected, and many of them were very, very wealthy. And what they did was they gave it up, al Kiddush Hashem. They gave it up because they understood that, that really, where do they belong? They don't belong in Galus. They belong being able to do the avoda in the Beis HaMikdash. And so that was a dedication. When it mentions the word Yeshua, maybe it's Yeshua Kohen Gadol, who was named and one of the important people. Now comes the Levium. And the Levium are much less. In fact, we know that even nowadays, there are a lot less Levium than there are Kohanim. So what is it that the Levium were in charge of? Well, they were the gatekeepers, they were the guards, and they were the workers. They did a lot of the menial work in the Beis HaMikdash. They were also the singers, and the total is it's a very, very pathetic total. The total is way significantly less than the total of the Kohanim. It's 341. Why is that? So there's a very sad story that in the Parak of Tehillim, when we say Al Naros Bavel, when we were on the rivers of Bavel, Sham Yashavnu Begam Bachinu Bezachreinu Tzion, we were crying, thinking about Tzion. Al Aravim Besocha Talinu Kinorasinu, upon the willows we hung our harps. Ki Sham Sha'aluna Shavenu Divrei Shir V'Salenu Simcha Shiru Lanu Mishir Tzion. Because what happened? because the Bavel people asked these beautiful Leviim. They said, sing us a song. You're the singers, sing us a song, the songs of Zion. And the Midrash says that they, just like it, when we remember back to the Holocaust, where there were so many people that were asked to sing and to make fun, they were made fun of, or they were asked to, just really as a method of entertainment for the Nazis. And here, the beautiful strings of the Beis HaMikdash, they refused. And you know what they did? They cut off their thumbs. They said, how could we ever sing? We could never do that. We can never tarnish the beauty of the songs of the Beis HaMikdash. And in fact, they cut off their thumbs. And by cutting off their thumbs, they cut off their means of being able to do anything. And they were maimed, and they couldn't function. But they also knew something else. They knew that because they're maimed, they wouldn't be able to function even in the Beis HaMikdash, because a maimed person could not function in the Beis HaMikdash. And so many of them didn't want to leave their style in Bavel, because what would happen? The conditions in Eretz Yisrael, first of all, how would they be able to make it? And second of all, they would return to being very, very small. And so what they did to be Moser Nefesh actually precluded them from ever being able to be Leviim back in Eretz Yisrael. Now, that was not a good thing to do, but ultimately, that just, unfortunately, it was a very tarnished experience for the Leviim. Then the Nesinim. Who are the Nesinim? So these are the Givonim. Again, if you remember who the Givonim were, in the time of Yehoshua, they were relegated to being second-class citizens, and the water carriers, the wood choppers, because what do? They tried to deceive the Bnei Israel, and as a result, David HaMelech made that you are not allowed to marry regular Jews, and they were just going to be caretakers. But they stuck around, and while Yehoshua, made them what they were going to be, they're with the group, and that is the Nesiim. The next group are the sons of the freed slaves of Shlomo. And those people are also, they're not Jewish, but what happened, remember, during the golden age of Shlomo HaMelech, what happened was everybody wanted to convert. And Shlomo didn't know what to do with these people. And he said, no, you can't convert. No one's allowed to convert. But yet, some of them just wanted to be among the grandeur in the palace and to serve in it. And so they became the Avadim Shlomo. And so in Pasuk Nun Hey, it talks about that they're all of these Avadim of Shlomo. Again, not the best for mention are coming up, but people that have been for a very long time part of the Jewish experience. Many of them later on are going to actually have a legitimate conversion, but because this group it's a little bit cloudy, they're not geologically pure Jews. Okay. Next, again, so it's very hard to know what to do with them. Then, in addition to which, there are people who couldn't be certain that the Asufim, that what was wrong with the Asufim, V'lo yachlu lahagib beis avosam b'zra'am im Yisraelhim. And then there's some people who, like the Falashas of Ethiopia, or we're not really sure, or the Bnei Israel in India, there's no real certainty that they're Jewish. They don't know who their mothers and fathers are, but they just know that they are Jewish, and there's just no full certainty about that. And so they don't know where they originate. They don't know what house they're from. And so again, these are just a band of merry men, more people. And then there are Kohanim who can't prove that they're Kohanim. They're acting like a Kohen, but it's not really clear if they're Kohanim or not. They could be, having married a divorcee. It's very unclear. And included among that are the Bnei Barzilai. Again, if we go back to our knowledge of Navi, we know that David HaMelech told Shlomo, his son, that Barzilai was very good to me, and he should always be as a guest at my table. And the Chachamim say that his daughters were not Jewish, but they converted to Judaism, and their daughters also converted with them, and many converted. But to marry a Kohen, what exactly they were permitted to do, very unclear. And And then Vayikra al Shamam. What did they called themselves Barzilai, even though they were daughters. So the whole thing, we have no idea. It's all identifiably questionable as to whether or not they're Kohanim. And the issue, and this is a very sad issue that we hear at the end of the parak, the issue is that we don't know what they are. And elu bekshu basam mitzvavshim lo matzau bi'agalu min hakohuna. So we don't know really what makes somebody a kohen, what makes someone. And again, if you take back to the idea of at Ellis Island, there was always authenticity. The Kohanim carried around their, so to speak, their passport, their identification that proved that they were Kohanim. But in Gullus, that was gone. And it was very hard. And so they went to the Hitz Rashta, and who is that? So he was the Persian title for the high government official. And they asked, and they wanted to know what to do. And he's presented with a lot of people. And some say that he was really Nehemiah, and he was appointed by the Persian king to rule in these Jewish territories. And unfortunately, he didn't know. And what does he say? Lo yachlu mikodesh kadashim ad amod kohen le'urim mitumim. This is the Jew in Galus. We're not going to know what Hashem really wants of us. We don't have that direct relationship anymore, where Hashem just comes with the Urim and Tumim and tells us. Remember, that's one of the 5 key elements that are no longer with us from after the Chorban Bayis Rishon until this, and the second Beis Hamikdash didn't have the Urim and Tumim. It didn't have the Shechina. It didn't have the fire. It didn't have the Kruvim. It didn't have all of these things, and so we're lost. The lo yachlu b'kodesh kodeshim, we just don't know. You can't eat from the kodesh kodeshim. There's no real declaration from Hashem what is tahor and what is tameh, and we're losing out on that direct relationship where Hashem tells us, now we have to wait. Now we're the Jews in Galus. Now we're living in a time where we don't just have the direct answers. We have to do whatever we can to try to seek out the answers. But to have it so easy, where the Urim and Tumim just light up and let us know, that's gone. Those days have unfortunately passed. And so it's a very sad, sorry state of affairs that it's only going to be in the time of Mashiach that we can answer that. And so now, we can't. And so for that reason, Ezra recognizes and he realizes that a lot of these people, if they stay in Galus, they're going to ultimately intermarry and mix in with the Jews in Galus. And the Jews in Galus have enough problems of assimilation to begin with. And they're not going to be the right grouping for anyone that stays behind. And so he sends them off, and he definitely advocates for the fact that they should be going. But understandably, we don't know. It's only going to be during the time of Mashiach that we can really know exactly what it is. Now, just to end the parak ends with an accounting of the animals. These animals were about 5,000. Now, 42,000 plus people went up, close to 43,000, went up to Eretz Yisrael. 5,000 animals. So on the pshat level, one would think, oh yeah, of course, those were going to be the ones that they were going to give for karbanos. No, you can't give those animals. Those animals are not kosher for karbanos. Those animals were carrying people and stuff. Now, do you think that there is enough room on 5,000 animals for 42,000 people? Heck no. So let's just appreciate for one moment the difficult travels that these people who are living up the life in Galus, they have all their cars and their fancy swimming pools and making fancy chasanas, and everything is good and everything is beautiful and everything is really exactly, they're living up the good life. And there's not a sure bet what they're going to be experiencing when they make Aliyah. But yet, they're fulfilling the promise that they made to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They're going to rebuild his home. They're going to build a Beis HaMikdash again And they're going to do this, and they're leaving and they're giving up a lot. But they're also traveling in a very dangerous way. It's not easy. It's women and children and men. And unlike if we compare it to what happened during Yetzias Mitzrayim, where 600,000 Jews came into Eretz Yisrael, but they were carried and they were coddled. They were ananei hakavod. They were treated exactly the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They were organized. They were from every shevet. They had a flag. They had an area. They had an organization. Everything was good. Hashem took care of them directly. And they were told to go out from Moshe. And they had the Torah, and they had all these miracles happen, and things that were just absolutely amazing. These people didn't have any of that. And yet, although we are definitely criticized as a nation that we could have brought Mashiach, but these people are good people. They really believe in Zionism. They believe in Eretz Yisrael. They believe these 42,360 people that are recorded here. And truthfully, when you count it up, it's really only 30,000. But so we're including the first wave of Shiva Tzion, perhaps, and some people say also some of the people from Ashur who got mixed into the experience, and that that went separately. That representation of the other tribes were also there. But essentially, we have to first take ownership of the fact that had we come like a choma in unity, we would not be in this position. We would be in Eretz Yisrael, and Mashiach would have come. And to understand how much these people were moser nefesh. These were not under good circumstances at any point. This is also not told to them by Moshe Rabbeinu. This is told by Cyrus, a king, a non-Jewish king, who at any point could be flippant and flip right back and say again, oh my goodness, why, I've decided, I've changed my mind. Now everyone come back. And they also knew that when they got into Eretz Yisrael, there were going to be laws, and it wasn't going to be autonomous for them. It wasn't that this was just going to be freedom. No, they were still under the auspices of Persia. And so all of that together, really we have to recognize the Moser Nefesh, but we also have to look at ourselves and say, wait a second, am I reading the writing on the wall? Am I really doing what I have to as the Jew in Galus? Is this really where I belong and how I belong? Where is my heart? And where should my soul be? And that's the story of Ezra.